President Trump has made his second state visit to the United Kingdom. It was an ostentatious display of pomp and ceremony laid on by the British royal family, all setting the scene for getting down to business with tech leaders and the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. So, did Britain get what it wanted from the US president in return? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the UK and US have signed a multi-billion-pound tech deal at the end of a lavish two-day state visit. President Trump praised relations between the two countries, saying they had an unbreakable bond. The visit included military processions and a flypast, and a huge state banquet with the royal family.
A two-day trip that was 6 months in the making. Donald Trump's visit to his mother's ancestral homeland went off without a hitch. The red carpet was fully rolled out, with Britain putting on the largest military parade ever for a visiting head of state in its history. Behind the carefully choreographed pleasantries, the public made their voices heard, even if they were kept out of earshot. But there was no criticism from inside the banquet hall, where President Trump was treated like royalty by the King of England.
The ocean may still divide us, but in so many other ways, we are now the closest of kin.
This was the second state visit, and that's the first, and maybe that's going to be the last time. I hope it is, actually.
The next day was back to politics, where a high-stakes meeting took place between Trump and Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The first order of business was business. A major tech deal was signed, with giants like Microsoft and Google pledging billions to the UK economy. And then the moment everyone was waiting for, the press conference.
He's a tough negotiator. I think it was a better deal for you than us, but these are minor details.
Both camps were fearing the potential for a meticulously planned meeting to go off script, especially over the inevitable questions surrounding convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein and Israel's genocide in Gaza. But the famously unpredictable president was on best behaviour and left in good spirits. The cost of these 2 days to the British taxpayer will be in the millions, but an event fraught with risk turning out to be an apparent success, well, some might say that's priceless.
Well, let's bring in our guests. In Washington, D.C., we have Jim Trusty. He's a former Justice Department prosecutor and lawyer. With me in the studio, I'm delighted to say we have the royal editor, Sarah Hewson, and the renowned political journalist, Adam Boulton. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Adam, it struck me this week that if President Trump had asked for the crown jewels, they would have been delivered in a Fortnum & Mason bag personally by a member of the royal family. Is that over-egging the pudding?
No, I think that's probably true. Indeed, I was just reading that when the Obamas came over, Obama's then young daughters were disappointed that they hadn't got a ride in the carriage, and so the Queen organised one for the children. So there's no doubt that the royal family have absolutely played their part in honouring a fellow head of state and his entourage. And that is clearly the instructions that they were getting from the head of government, from Sir Keir Starmer. Interesting, I think, that the King did take a slightly political tone, make it very clear that he regards Europe as coming under threat from tyranny without no names, no patch drill, but it was clear he meant Russia. Also going with one of his own personal themes of the environment. But from the point of view of the government here, Sir Keir Starmer, he appears to have got what he wanted, which was to cement the economic partnership between the US and the UK, particularly in terms of tech investment and also, although he didn't quite get everything, a slightly lower level of tariffs than other countries. Also, I think in foreign policy terms, you know, he has come under a lot of criticism for domestic matters, but he and his government appear to have handled this one quite deftly, in as much as maintaining the so-called special relationship between the US and the UK, while on the global issue, if you like, of Russia and particularly Gaza, making it clear that there are big differences in the US-UK alliance, with Britain on the verge of recognizing Palestine.
Thanks, Adam. Sarah, give us your verdict. You've covered so many state visits, including the first one with Trump, the first time round. How has this week gone?
Well, this has been bigger and better than ever before. As President Trump would like us to know, it is unprecedented, this second state visit, the first for a US president. He says he'd like it to be the last. And so they had to pull out all of the stops and really push the boat out for this one. And there is a difference because it took place at Windsor Castle rather than Buckingham Palace. Buckingham Palace is a building site at the moment, so all state visits are taking place at Windsor Castle, and Emmanuel Macron, the first to be hosted there. There was the biggest guard of honour that has been seen in living memory. Some 1,300 troops on the streets of Windsor. I say on the streets of Windsor, but not really, because actually one thing that was different about this state visit was there was no public involvement at all. The carriage procession took place entirely within the grounds of the Windsor estate. There was a literal ring of steel erected around the Windsor Castle, and Donald Trump didn't come anywhere near any members of the public, and that meant they didn't get any of the protests on camera. They got the pictures they wanted to get across, which was this extremely warm welcome for the president, the VVIP treatment, without the baby blimp that we saw flying over London back in 2019, for example.
Thanks, Sarah. Jim, to you, you know the president, you've worked with him and for him. How has the royal visit been received in the United States this week?
Well, I think very well. I mean, look, the only discount to that is that this is a president who is unbelievably energized. I mean, he is tackling multiple issues every day and issuing Truth Social comments late into the night where we're all scratching our heads saying, how does this guy manage to do this every day? So there's competing headlines, to be sure, in the United States. But, you know, despite our successful breaking away from the mothership way back when, we still have kind of a fascination for the pageantry. And I think a lot of the imagery coming out of Windsor Castle, frankly, you know, such a beautiful setting, I think that has played well. And the other thing that, you know, you might be getting a little taste of, President Trump has kind of an undervalued sense of humor. You know, the guy is actually shockingly able to kind of make fun of himself from time to time. That's not, you know, how a lot of the media tries to portray him. But Sarah touched on the toast the other night, where he said, you know, I'm the only one to have been, you know, subjected to these wonderful state gatherings twice as a president. I hope I'm the last. Well, you know, I guess some people will report that as kind of a straight egotistical moment, but really it's tongue in cheek. And I think it's a great moment when, you know, he makes a crack like that at this beautiful formal table in the midst of such a great meeting. So I think it's playing very well, but obviously lots of competing headlines every day of the week.
And Jim, just looking in from the States, there are very few countries in the world who can do what the UK has done this week. You know, get the president over and impress him, put on a big show, and it plays to a global audience.
Yeah, it does. And look, I'm an Anglophile. I mean, I've always been kind of a student of history, and that means I kind of obsess about Winston Churchill like a lot of Yanks do. And I like the fact that we've had this, you know, forged in steel kind of special relationship. I have to tell you, going back to the Obama years, you know, the obvious symbolism of taking Winston Churchill's bust out of the Oval Office and putting Martin Luther King's in. Martin Luther King may be a great candidate, but it was not lost that this was marking kind of a new philosophical age where Obama tended to view the UK as some sort of colonial power rather than a great ally. So I think that Trump has walked that back. And I think when it comes to obviously counterintelligence, espionage, national security, but also criminal investigative sharing of information, I think that's probably all on the rebound, which is important. And I think that the overall message is a good one, that, you know, particularly as we're sitting here looking at war on the European continent, that we're not going to lose track of the depth of relations between the UK and US.
Thank you, Jim. Adam, to you, is there a feeling that Keir Starmer has gone very early with this offer?
Well, he did go very early with it. You know, his first meeting in the Oval Office as Prime Minister, just as Theresa May had done it previously. But the truth is that, you know, British diplomats, British politicians had done their work, and flattery does work with Donald Trump. And therefore they played their ace card very early on. And, you know, there's been a positive result with the first agreed trade deal with the United States, you know, in terms of, you know, tariffs on people exporting to you are not good news. And if you can diminish those, then that is a good thing. And if you like, if you've got Donald Trump moving into an America First direction, there are many in this country who want to see the UK tucked in, if you like, as part of, you know, that greater American sphere. And where Keir Starmer has been successful, by and large, with this visit, is he's kept the politics out of it. I mean, that may sound odd, but, you know, they timed this visit so it didn't coincide with Parliament sitting, so there wasn't a big argument in Parliament about whether Donald Trump was welcome to address both houses of Parliament. And they, by and large, kept off the agenda that, you know, the MAGA influencers are using about London being a hellhole run by a Muslim, stuff with crime. They've stayed away really from talking about the freedom of speech issues, where, you know, it's one where, you know, you can make criticisms of both countries in terms of their freedom of speech record. So, in other words, one of the things that this visit has sent out is the message that America is a very big and important country that in general terms is important to us and we feel friendly towards, without getting involved into polarization, MAGA politics and all the rest of it. So that's it's a negative, but it's a very successful negative.
Sarah, I guess one of the great things about having a close friendship is that you can criticize your friends. So in the run-up to this summer, we had J.D. Vance saying all sorts of things about the UK and freedom of speech. He then pops up in the Cotswolds in Oxfordshire, Gloucestershire, having a nice summer holiday with his family. President Trump went to Scotland to his golf course for a vacation. It's clear that the fascination with the United Kingdom is enduring.
Yeah, and friendship is really what this visit has been about. And Adam's right. Day one particularly was not about the politics. It was all about cementing the ties between the two nations. And President Trump talking about, you know, special, not even touching the sides effectively when it comes to describing the relationship, but also that personal relationship between the king and the president. Donald Trump describing him as his friend, a long-term friend, a gentleman. And one of the moments that stood out for me in his speech during the state banquet was when he praised the king, and he heaped so much praise on the king in the speech. That was the largest part of his speech, really, but in particular for raising a fantastic son in Prince William. Yes.
He's got two sons.
Yes. And as I heard that, I thought, oh, yes, you are very pointedly, I think, here, making the distinction between Prince William. And we know that, you know, Prince William earlier this year went to the opening of the Notre Dame Cathedral and had that 40-minute bilateral with President Trump. And President Trump a big fan, and therefore, as well as the king being the diplomatic ace card, they've wheeled out the Prince and Princess of Wales to play a really key role in this for both Melania and Donald Trump.
Do you think that was absolutely done deliberately as a slight on Harry and Meghan?
Well, I wouldn't put it past Donald Trump, because we know he's made no bones about his dislike for Meghan and also for Prince Harry and what he has said and done and the impact that that had on the Queen, because Donald Trump, a huge fan of the late Queen. And of course, one of the highlights for him of this visit was that private moment visiting her tomb in St. George's Chapel in Windsor. So I think it's hard not to see that as being deliberate. By and large, he stuck to the script, which he doesn't always do, but there were a couple of deviations, and maybe the son and the radiant, beautiful Catherine, Princess of Wales, might have been just a little bit of Trump elaboration.
Thanks, sir. Jim, to you, give us your view on this special relationship, as they call it in London. Is it that special for Americans?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I heard the word transactional early on in terms of describing President Trump. And look, his foreign policy is such, it kind of reflects his upbringing as a New York real estate magnate, that he's very used to tough negotiations, to difficult conversations. He may appreciate flattery, but he's also got pretty thick skin, and he's used to pretty bruising fights in the world of real estate and now litigation and a presidential contest. So, I think that he is the type of guy who's going to talk to almost every world leader.
Thank you, Jim. Adam, on the first night, we could not help but notice some images projected onto the walls of Windsor Castle. President Trump, back in the day, just plain old Donald Trump as he was, partying with Jeffrey Epstein, disgraced billionaire paedophile. How much of a spectre was that over the week, do you feel?
Well, it was given focus by what happened in the days immediately beforehand, which was the departure of Peter Mandelson as ambassador to Washington because of his own relationship with Epstein, the convicted paedophile. Whether or not Peter Mandelson had done something in his private life in terms of messages which came out to Epstein, which warranted him departing, there was no doubt that the political pressure on the government here was such that he had to go. Now, Donald Trump, of course, is under pressure to discuss the so-called Epstein files, the extent of his involvement with Epstein, and indeed the incriminating, if one can call it that, evidence against Peter Mandelson that sealed his fate only came out because of domestic politics in the United States, disclosing emails and a birthday book.
The birthday book.
Exactly. So in some senses, Peter Mandelson was collateral damage. But Donald Trump can say very clearly that his relationship with Epstein ended before Epstein was convicted, whereas the biggest criticism of Peter Mandelson was that it continued, and he was even giving him advice on how he could beat that issue.
Sarah, just come in on the Epstein stuff, because if none of that had been public knowledge and Andrew had never given that interview, famously, notoriously with Newsnight on the BBC, he would have been everywhere this week.
Well, he'd still have been trade envoy as well, wouldn't he? And so, therefore, he'd have been playing an absolutely vital role in this state visit. And the spectre of Epstein looming large over this, not just on the round tower of Windsor Castle, but because, it has affected Peter Mandelson, Donald Trump, and also Prince Andrew, braced for potentially more embarrassing revelations in the birthday book, as Adam has set out. And we saw Prince Andrew the day before the state visit began, because he was out in public for the funeral of the Duchess of Kent. That, the difference being, was a family occasion, and there is absolutely no public role for him and the King and his heir.
Obviously.
Yes, exactly. And Prince William, very, very clear that he does not play a role in public life.
Thanks, Sarah. Jim, back to you. What more do you think President Trump can get out of the United Kingdom now? He's had 2 state visits. The one thing that is in the back of my mind, he loves golf. The Open Championship gets moved around golf courses every year, and he's made no secret of his desire to bring it to Turnberry, his golf course in Scotland. Do you think maybe that was privately discussed this week?
I would say only about a 99% chance. I'm not going to say a 100% chance. I mean, look, the guy lives and breathes golf. He's actually a surprisingly good golfer. I'm bad enough at golf where I would never play with him because he'd lose all faith in me as a human being. So, I guarantee that's part of the conversation. If I can go back to Epstein for a second, though, Adam raised a good point about President Trump distancing prior to all of the kind of public incarnations of what was happening with Epstein. It's actually a little bit stronger than that. I mean, Trump kicked him out of the Mar-a-Lago club, saying this guy likes young women, he can't be around us. So he had a pretty good sense long before he ran for president that Epstein was a bad guy. And as we fight in the U.S., and it's kind of a good refresher to me that you're living the Epstein crisis in the U.K. too, there's a lot of political interest. There's congressional interest, oversight committees asking questions, trying to look at prosecutor files, which is actually kind of unusual. But at the end of the day, I think if there was anything in that file that was particularly harmful other than just a general knowledge of each other, that would have been leaked a long time ago. We had an FBI director who literally had someone on his staff to leak things to the New York Times that shouldn't have been out there. So I think if there was something devastating for Trump, it would already be out. So it's a little bit of a gadfly, not some sort of serious injury coming towards him.
Jim, can I just ask, given your friendship and your working relationship with President Trump, how much do you think it irritates him constantly being reminded of parties that he went to in the 90s with Epstein, or Epstein was there? And as you've said, he categorically cut that relationship in 2004. He says he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago and he was no longer welcome. How much do you think privately Trump is annoyed when people keep asking about Epstein?
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, he's not confiding in me about it, but I would guarantee that it gets a steady string of expletives every few days when it bubbles up in the media. It is annoying. It is frustrating. Now, you can argue there's a little bit of self-inflicted injury in that prior to the election and during the early parts of his presidency here, you had different officials announcing and pronouncing, we are going to be completely transparent. We're going to make sure everybody sees everything there is. I don't think that's good territory. I think prosecutor files should be considered somewhat sacrosanct. They do their talking in court, and we've gotten used to special counsel in the United States where they write reports about their evidence, whether they prosecute or not. But generally speaking, I think you should protect victims, law enforcement techniques, and even subjects of the investigation from exposure if it's not going to be something that gives them an opportunity to acquit themselves in court. So I'm a little bit of a stick in the mud about that. I recognize I'm probably different than a lot of people from being a prosecutor for 27 years. But I think that this storm is going to pass at some point soon.
Thank you, Jim. Adam, to you. So President Trump flies back to the United States. This has been a fantastic success for the United Kingdom. The legacy, I guess, will be a lot of American investment now in tech in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, very important. And I think very important for where the UK is, because it's clear that the UK on tech, in terms of the welcome which it's giving to tech companies, is differentiating itself from the European Union. This is one of the consequences, if you like, of Brexit. And it's also clear that, of course, the growth sector in this area is American-led. And we've had the boss of NVIDIA, who was at the dinner and at Chequers, saying, the British don't realise just how advanced they are in this area and what potential there is in that area. And I think that therefore means that in things like the Online Services Bill and Data Protection Bill, it is likely that this government will stick to a fairly liberal line towards American tech, which won't necessarily please its own supporters, but could have commercial dividends. And, people are wondering what happens now. You can't really invite Donald Trump back for a third state visit. So what can you do? And I think that tech area and being supportive of American tech is clearly an area which the government, particularly under Peter Kyle, who's moved from science to business, I think they will be pursuing that. I would also say, as far as the pomp and the pageantry goes, Britain does still have one card to play, which is next year is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Now, I'm old enough to remember the bicentennial in 1976, and the Queen did make a prominent visit to the United States to coincide with that.
So Charles goes next year?
Charles or possibly William, and because it's quite clear that they're forming dynastic relationships.
Yeah.
I mean,
just coming on that, Sarah, is that likely, do you think, from what you're being briefed?
Well, I think it's potentially a good card to play as well, because as we heard from Trump, he's a big fan of both the Prince and Princess of Wales, and he said he looks forward to more.
And the other thing, of course, is football. Is there not going to be?
There is a Soccer World Cup in the United States next summer.
William is, guess what, the head of
the Football Association.
Yes.
So, Sarah, just a couple more questions for you. A lot of people will be curious in the international world about the King's health. He looked good.
The King looks good. Prince Harry, who was over last week, said that his father was doing great, but that his focus now was on his father and his relationship with him. Look, the King has cancer. He is undergoing treatment. That treatment is ongoing, and that will take its toll. But these moments are really, really, really important for him to be able to put on the big show and do what his government wants him to do, which is charm the president in order to secure those trade deals. And even hearing the King talk about wanting to go further on trade, that was quite extraordinary in itself in his speech.
Also, I think just politically, there's been a game being played, led really by Keir Starmer, of wooing Donald Trump on the subject of Ukraine. And while there haven't been firm measures taken against Russia, it's clear that Donald Trump now does talk about Russia as the aggressor and expresses, and that I think is a result of this kind of softly approach, if you like.
He's said that President Putin has let me down on Ukraine. That's what Trump has said. Jim Trusty in Washington, D.C. Thank you. Adam Boulton and Sarah Hewson here with me in the studio. Thank you all. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.